Tonight on Primetime, Donald Trump heads to Beijing for a high-stakes summit with Xi Jinping as trade tensions, Taiwan and global security disputes dominate the agenda. A chance for the two biggest economies to reset relations. Good evening. US President Donald Trump is travelling to Beijing for his first visit to China since 2017. Trade disputes, rare earth exports and tensions over Taiwan are expected to dominate the talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Here's more.
US President Donald Trump is due to arrive in Beijing on Wednesday, ahead of 2 days of talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. It will be the first face-to-face meeting between the two leaders in more than 6 months, and Trump's first visit to China since 2017. The summit comes as fighting linked to Iran continues to disrupt shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump said he does not believe Washington needs China's help to end the conflict.
With the Iranians, do you think he can help in any way?
No, I don't think we need any help with Iran. We'll win it one way or the other. We'll win it peacefully or otherwise.
Trade is expected to be one of the main issues on the agenda, as Washington and Beijing discuss extending a truce over Chinese restrictions on rare earth exports. The materials are essential for defense systems, electronics and electric vehicles. Chinese customs data shows exports of several specialized rare earth minerals remain sharply lower than before controls were introduced last year in response to Trump's tariffs. Taiwan is also expected to be a major point of tension during the summit. China repeated its opposition to US arms sales to the island on Wednesday, after the Trump administration approved an $11 billion weapons package for Taiwan in December. In Beijing, security was tightened ahead of Trump's arrival, while some residents expressed skepticism about the visit.
He's not trustworthy. He's like, 80 years old now? He's quite old. He sure loves to stir things up. He's always getting into conflicts with other countries and stuff. Honestly, I have a really bad impression of him.
I don't know if he's genuinely sincere about this, but speaking as a Chinese person and as someone working in trade, I just hope some good policies can come out of this.
More than a dozen American business executives are expected to accompany Trump during the visit, with possible Chinese purchases of Boeing aircraft and US agricultural products also likely to be discussed.
Well, when the presidents of the United States and China meet face-to-face, the consequences are felt far beyond the two countries themselves. Joining us now to unpack what's at stake from this summit is Ivani Vasola, professor at State University of New York in New York, United States. Professor, very good indeed to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's just put this in perspective then. How important is this Trump-Xi meeting in the current global climate?
It is extremely important, considering that in the almost 10 years since the last visit of a U.S. president, that was precisely President Trump during his first term, since that visit until now, both countries have experienced difficult moments in their bilateral relationship. There are several issues, and many issues without a clear resolution, and one of the most important of them is trade. Both countries have extreme levels of trade between them. They are quite interdependent economically, but there are problems, particularly since the tariffs imposed by President Trump on several countries, including China, past year. So in the next 2 days, both presidents, May 14, May 15, are going to have several meetings, and it's not a surprise. The president is taking with this trip several CEOs of important U.S. multinational corporations, including Elon Musk.
Yes. Yeah, trade, as you say, very, very important. Trade tensions may dominate publicly, but behind the scenes, what issues do you think are likely to matter most behind closed doors? And is the Chinese leader somebody that you can have those sort of gloves off, no holes barred, very private behind the scenes conversations with?
So in addition to international trade, and I must say that in international trade is very important to include the issue of rare minerals. This is a contentious issue, and remember that past year, during the height of the tariffs negotiation, there was a serious problem between the United States and China because China has provided the rare minerals, processed, of course, that United States needs for its technical development, weapons, and so on. And so this is going to be in the negotiations. That preliminary agreement made about 1 year ago is to expire soon, and the president are going to renegotiate an extension. But obviously there are other issues, and I suppose in analysts here that something are going about between United States and Israel in the pursuit against Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is important for many countries in the world, including China. And it's possible that President Trump is going to ask the president of China to influence in one way or another Iran to come up with a deal, a type of agreement to end the war.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And you mentioned rare earth exports, rare earth materials there. They've obviously become, as you say, a major pressure point. How much leverage does China hold on that issue at this point?
Oh, it holds a leverage for sure. China, in the last 2 years, in the last 10 years, last decade or so, has grown. We talk about the ascent of China, is that China not only has grown and is growing economically, one of the largest economies in the world, if in large, but also of China. It's because the country in this process of economic growth has become very assertive in international affairs, particularly in trade, again, with economic transactions between China and several countries in the Americas, in Africa, in Europe, and in the Middle East. So, of course, is a very important, a significant player in international affairs, and has a very complex and significant relationship with the United States, significant for both countries, China and the United States. So therefore, yes, there is leverage from the part of China.
And another issue that continues to be contentious, of course, is Taiwan. It remains one of the most sensitive issues between Washington and Beijing. How tense is that part of the relationship right now? And is there an opportunity on this issue for China just to get President Trump to very slightly change his position just a tiny bit? Would that be seen as a big win for China?
So let's put it this way. It's not in the interest of President Trump. It's not the interest of the government of the United States to go for a conflict with China. Not at all. And this is standard. All presidents of the United States, they go in this direction. That is not in the interest to have an armed conflict. During the Trump administration, the issue with Taiwan has taken a little bit a different route in the sense that, for example, at this moment, there is a package in discussion for the United States to offer or to sell weapons to Taiwan. And this is in the Congress, but President Trump is not in favor of this agreement of selling weapons to Taiwan, indicating that President Trump is more willing to negotiate with China than go for an open conflict because of the Taiwan question.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And finally, Professor, just looking at this relationship overall, how would you characterize it now? Is this really about damage limitation, or is it a genuine chance, do you think, to reset the future relationship between the two biggest economies on the planet?
Certainly, again, is in the interest of both to address the problems in their relationship to a more agreeable partnership. Is the interest of both, because I'm going to repeat, the levels of interdependence, economic interdependence, are very important among these two largest economies, and they exchange products in very complex sectors of their economies, including the technology in this moment of big development intelligence. And both countries are regarding the development of intelligence. Is in their interest, total in their interest, to develop a stable relationship.
Professor, we thank you very much indeed. The connection was not perfect, but the insights and analysis were extremely valuable. We thank you very much indeed for your time. Okay, after the break, Vladimir Putin says Russia's new Samad nuclear missile will enter combat duty by the end of the year, raising fresh questions about global strategic stability. Do stay with us.
Figuras armenias en Argentina. Y empieza por plata y es para los gobiernos. Un tipo muy piola.
No, money from Armenia, from Russia. A group of Russian Armenians.
People who are financial based.
Some rich Armenians, they live in Russia.
Pashinyan lo puso.
Pashinyan is not protecting their own color. The Armenian game is Russia.
No con Pashinyan mismo, pero
que remuevan a Pashinyan.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia will deploy its new Sarmat strategic nuclear missile by the end of the year. Well, Putin said the missile is capable of carrying nuclear warheads over long distances and can penetrate existing and future missile defense systems.
Now for Sarmat. We began working on it in 2011, and in 2018 this work and the advantages of the new advanced missile systems, including Sarmat, were publicly announced. Let me remind you what was discussed at the time and what the advantage of our latest system is. First, it is the most powerful missile system in the world, comparable in capability to the Voyevoda missile system currently in our arsenal, which, as just noted, dates back to the Soviet time. The total weight of the delivered payload exceeds that of any existing Western counterpart by more than 4 times. The missile can travel not only along a ballistic trajectory, but also along a suborbital one. This, thirdly, makes it possible to ensure a range of more than 35,000 kilometers, while at the same time doubling its accuracy. Finally, it has the ability to penetrate all existing and future anti-missile defense systems. By the end of this year, Sarmat will indeed be placed on combat duty.
Well, as geopolitical tensions remain high, Moscow is once again then putting its strategic nuclear capabilities front and centre. Joining us now to unpack the significance of Russia's latest announcement is Stefano Rittendale, Chief Intelligence Officer at Artorias. Joining us from New York in the United States. Mr. Rittendale, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Good to have you with us. Well, we heard from President Putin there. Just give us your evaluation, your analysis of this Sarmat missile system. How significant is it, and how should the world feel about its proposed deployment?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I think this is very important to analyze from a strategic nuclear deterrence perspective. We do know that the United States and Russia are modernizing and spending a substantial amount of money and resources to modernize their nuclear missile capabilities and basically the nuclear triad overall as well. And the Sarmat, although is a standard ICBM and intercontinental ballistic missiles, is kind of the new wave of these ballistic missile capabilities that the United States and Russia want to field within their nuclear triad forces in conjunction with, let's say, hypersonic missiles as well, or advancement in nuclear submarines. So from a strategic sense, it is significant, and the Sarmat does kind of enter in that new age of the 21st century ICBMs, as a lot of these are pretty old. But I think we need to take a step back and just be very cautious of taking Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, at his word. We do know that Sarmat had a failure in September 2024, and the Russian nuclear program, although very advanced and obviously the largest in the world, has not had their own issues as well with failures of certain systems, specifically the Sarmat. And I think President Putin is going to make bold claims and obviously try to say that they're very successful and that they will field this system. But one, we really don't have much information on the actual capabilities of that outside of official statements. And two, we don't know how many Sarmat missiles will be employed within Russia's nuclear forces and missile forces. I would suspect it would start at low numbers. And again, this is a nuclear missile, so not necessarily something that they might have a large quantity of and might have to rely on decade-old missile systems still.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point you make there about rhetoric versus realism. Putin described the missile as capable of bypassing current and future missile defense systems. That's quite an extraordinary claim, particularly the second half of it. How credible is that claim, do you think?
To be honest, I would put very little credibility in that statement. We do know that President Putin in Russia is going to continue to reinforce their strategic nuclear program for geopolitical reasonings and for messaging reasonings against President Trump, the United States, as the West as a whole. Obviously, Russia will always, we see the statements with former President Medvedev, who always threatens the nuclear card against the West because of the support against Ukraine. So obviously this just fits a broader narrative of information warfare and propaganda to kind of highlight Russia's strength in the nuclear realm, specifically taking into account there are a lot of difficulties in Ukraine at the tactical sense. So I wouldn't put too much credibility on the SARMAT's capability of defeating Western, even future or let alone current air defense capabilities, specifically considering that the test in September of 2024 was a failure. So I would be very cautious in President Putin's rhetoric right now.
So do you think this is more about messaging then than it is about sort of practical military capability? And if it is more about messaging, who is the primary audience? Is it the West? Is it the US? Is it Ukraine? Who is this aimed at?
Well, I think this is much more in line with information warfare and messaging. I mean, from a military perspective, outside of nuclear war, which, I mean, I think is a whole different conversation of itself, this has very little practical usage, specifically these ICBM capabilities, but it clearly fits within a messaging perspective. And I think the message is geared to basically three main audiences that you've identified. One, the United States, obviously with President Trump specifically, where Russia wants to continue to act as a premier geopolitical rival of the United States. Obviously, President Trump right now is in Beijing, meeting with President Xi Jinping. I think President Putin wants to be viewed as the alternative geopolitical rival, not necessarily China, when the world continues to be now China's rise as the U.S. primary geopolitical rival. So Putin is trying to undermine China's rise with these kind of statements. Number two, it's to Europe and the European Union as a whole. Obviously, this continues to show the strategic messaging against that and how Russia, even with the difficulties inside of Ukraine, can leverage these systems to challenge the European Union. And thirdly, and I think to a less degree, would be Ukraine. Obviously, Russia has a lot of military difficulties inside of Ukraine. We've actually seen Ukraine maybe change the situation on the ground even so slightly, where they might have a small advantage after 4 years of war. And Russia will always leverage its nuclear rhetoric, but to a lesser degree, Ukraine is one of the intended recipients of this messaging.
And what about NATO in all of this? How concerned are NATO countries likely to be? I mean, Mark Rutte's got a difficult job to do. Are you expecting any kind of response?
I mean, I think NATO would, might issue a response to this, or and in many aspects, they might just ignore it to not give credibility to President Putin and kind of field in this neuter rhetoric. I think it's very important to note that every time Russia has had difficulties in Ukraine, they basically go back to this information warfare of nuclear threats. And, as I alluded to earlier, former President Medvedev is a key conduit of nuclear threats. And we've kind of seen NATO as a whole kind of ignore that for years now. Now, obviously, both the nuclear powers in NATO, France, the United Kingdom, and Europe, and then the United States are the primary aspects where they might see or challenge Russia's nuclear dominance. But in the end of the day, it's still the United States. So any specific response will probably come from the United States and then to a second degree NATO. But NATO is going to be focusing a lot more so on Ukraine and the tactical situation there, and really not give any credence to Russia's nuclear bravado, as it's something that is old as time, that they always threaten no matter what.
I mean, as you've rightly said, because this is nuclear, an escalation is unlikely. But nevertheless, do you think it could prompt an acceleration of military spending across Europe and even further?
Right. I mean, I did say at the beginning of this, the United States is prioritizing modernizing their nuclear force. We do know President Trump specifically has been very keen on modernizing the U.S. nuclear arsenal. We have seen with the $1.5 trillion budget for the Department of War, the Department of Defense in the United States, a significant portion of that is going to go to U.S. nuclear triad. So yes, I think this will serve as a justification, at least for the Department of Defense, to say, see, Russia is advancing their nuclear force, we need to follow suit specifically. And also, because of the concerns with NATO, we have seen France and the UK be much more reliant on their nuclear arsenal as well. France having conversations of expanding the nuclear umbrella to European countries, and the UK as well, even as a partner of the United States and as Europe. And so we might see both France and the UK look at the Russia's modernizing their nuclear force and the deployment of the Cermat to show as justification to expand their nuclear capabilities and modernize the nuclear force, in reality, the West has been negligent and neglected our nuclear arsenal for decades now.
Mr. Rittendell, great to get your analysis on this. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories shaping the day with Andy Mioch. Don't go away. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime now. Andy Mioch has joined us to bring us the very latest business news. Andy, what have you got on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, the International Energy Agency has warned that global oil inventories fell at a record pace in the past 2 months. The U.S. president took a major business delegation for his China trip, and there's some inflation and earnings reports there as well. So let's get started. Oil prices have steadied following days of gains as the IEA warned of rapidly depleting oil inventories. Meanwhile, the Middle East conflict is prompting Asian refiners to seek alternatives to supplies coming from the Persian Gulf.
Brent crude oil futures trimmed earlier losses and steadied around $108 per barrel on Wednesday after a 7.5% rally over the previous 3 sessions. The move followed the International Energy Agency's warning that global observed oil inventories fell at a record pace of around 4 million barrels per day in March and April. The IEA said in its oil market report that with inventories already drawing sharply, further volatility is likely ahead of the peak summer demand season, and that the market could remain severely undersupplied until October, even if the conflict ends sooner. Middle East tensions continue to disrupt flows, with Asian refiners, including Japan, seeking alternatives to Persian Gulf supplies. Meanwhile, reports suggest Iranian export shipments have recently stalled, marking the first sustained interruption since the conflict started. US President Donald Trump said the situation remains under control, downplaying concerns ahead of talks with China's Xi Jinping.
All eyes are on Beijing, where U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping on Thursday for talks on a wide range of issues, from Iran and Taiwan to trade and rare earths. Trump brought more than a dozen of top U.S. executives for the China trip, including a last-minute addition, NVIDIA's CEO Jensen Huang.
Good to have you, Tim.
NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang has joined US President Donald Trump during his visit to Beijing, igniting hopes in China that the trip could yield results in the tech giant's long-stalled effort to sell its powerful H200 AI chips to local customers. Huang's inclusion, along with more than a dozen US corporate chiefs, was not part of the original plan when the White House released its initial list of executives, including Tesla CEO Elon Musk and Apple's Tim Cook. Trump called Huang on Tuesday after seeing media coverage that he had not been invited, a source familiar with the matter told Reuters. Huang was subsequently spotted by White House reporters boarding Air Force One in Alaska, joining Trump on his flight to China. NVIDIA's chips have become the backbone of the global AI industry, powering the development of systems such as OpenAI's ChatGPT and underpinning the ambitions of technology companies worldwide. China is racing to build its own semiconductor industry and reduce dependence on foreign technology. But its homegrown chips have yet to match the performance of NVIDIA's most advanced offerings. For Chinese companies seeking to compete at the frontier of AI development, NVIDIA's hardware remains, for now, without peer.
The GPU is just a...
U.S. consumer prices increased at a brisk pace for a second straight month in April, as the war with Iran pushed up energy costs and food prices surged, heightening political risks for Donald Trump and his Republican Party ahead of November's midterm elections.
US inflation rose to its highest level in 3 years in April, driven by surging energy and food prices linked to the war with Iran. The Labour Department's Consumer Price Index, released Tuesday, increased 0.6% last month. That put the annual inflation rate at 3.8%, the highest since May of 2023. It marked the second straight month that US prices increased sharply. Higher energy costs accounted for more than 40% of the rise in the Consumer Price Index last month. Gas prices jumped more than 5%, and consumers also paid more for electricity. Food prices in April also accelerated. Beef prices continued to surge, fruits and vegetable costs rose, as did prices for dairy products and eggs. The strong inflation reading added to data last week showing a larger than expected increase in jobs last month, strengthening expectations that the Federal Reserve would keep interest rates unchanged into 2027.
South Korea's largest company, Samsung Electronics, failed to reach a wage agreement with its workers' union. Some 50,000 workers are expected to walk out for an 18-day strike starting next week if the union's demands aren't met.
Samsung Electronics and its union failed to reach a pay deal on Wednesday, heightening the risk of a massive strike that threatens not only chip production, the company's standing, but also the health of the South Korean economy. The impasse followed marathon government-mediated talks on Monday and Tuesday. Furious over what it calls a massive gap in bonus pay with rival SK Hynix, the union has said that should its demands not be met, workers will strike for 18 days from May 21st. More than 50,000 workers could walk off the job, the union has flagged. Samsung said in a statement it regretted the collapse of talks and would continue efforts to prevent a worst-case scenario through what it described as sincere dialogue with the union.
Chinese giant Alibaba reported its core profitability plunged in the March quarter amid heavy investments in tech and e-commerce. The company also announced even more funding for its artificial intelligence business.
China's Alibaba will exceed its planned investment of 380 billion yuan, or $55.9 billion, on AI over 3 years, it said on Wednesday, after reporting quarterly results squeezed by high levels of spending. It did not give detail of any new target to replace the existing one that was announced early last year. In the quarter to March, the company's profits came under pressure from investment in AI and cloud infrastructure, as well as ongoing spending on the quick commerce segment that covers deliveries made within 60 minutes. The Chinese tech giant said its adjusted earnings before interest, taxes and amortization came in at 5.1 billion Chinese yuan, or $750.9 million, an 84% year-on-year drop. Alibaba's US-listed shares were initially higher in pre-market trade before turning negative. The shares fell as much as 4% before pairing losses.
And finally, in the tourism industry, Germany's TUI posted a slightly narrower than expected second quarter adjusted operating loss as Europe's largest tour company streamlined its airline business and reported strong demand for cruises.
TUI posted a narrower than expected adjusted operating loss for the second quarter. Wednesday's update comes after Europe's largest tour company streamlined its airline business. The German firm also reported strong demand for cruises. TUI said it made a $221 million loss for the quarter to the end of March, close to a tenth lower than a year before. That was despite a near $47 million hit from the Iran war, which led to flight cancellations and rerouting ships. It was also ahead of analyst forecasts. Airlines have warned of the knock-on effect of the war that began in February. Tourists have also started booking trips closer to home and more last minute to avoid disruption. Looking ahead, TUI said bookings for the second half of the year were strong and higher prices would boost revenue. Second quarter revenue was similar to last year at around $4.3 billion. TUI confirmed its revised outlook for the 2026 financial year.
And that'd be all in the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Andy, amazing that story about the NVIDIA boss just hitching a ride on Air Force One.
He did get a call that's difficult to decline, though.
Yes, it is indeed. Yeah, thank you very much, as always. Thank you, Andy. Okay, after the break, Turkey says preparations for direct trade with Armenia are complete in what could become another important step toward normalization between the two neighbors. Don't go away.
Figura Armenia que Argentina. Empieza por plata y es para los gobiernos. Un tipo muy piola.
No, money from Armenia from Russia. A group of Russian Armenians. People who are financial days, some rich Armenians, they live in Russia.
Pashinyan lo puso.
Pashinyan is not protecting neoliberal.
The Armenian game is Russia.
No con Pashinyan mismo, pero.
Que remuevan a Pashinyan.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back to Primetime. Good to have you with us. Turkey says it has completed formal preparations for direct trade with Armenia in what could mark another step in the long-running normalization process between Ankara and Yerevan. Here are the details.
Turkey says it has completed formal preparations to begin direct commercial activity with Armenia, marking another practical step in a normalization process that has been moving forward since 2022. Foreign Ministry spokesman Onju Keçeli said Wednesday that bureaucratic preparations for direct trade between the two countries were finalized as of Monday, May 11th. He added, however, that technical and bureaucratic work aimed at reopening the shared land border still remains ongoing. Under the new arrangement, goods moving from Turkey to Armenia via third countries or from Armenia to Turkey through the same route can now list Turkey or Armenia as the final destination or country of origin. While all this may sound technical, it is of considerable diplomatic importance. Turkey and Armenia have no formal diplomatic relations, and their land border has remained shut since 1993, when it was closed during the First Karabakh War. But a normalization process began after the 2020 conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, with both Ankara and Yerevan appointing special envoys and holding direct talks. Since then, direct flights between the two countries have resumed, while the two sides have agreed in principle to open their shared border to third country nationals and diplomatic passport holders. Progress, however, has remained cautious, partly because Turkey-Armenia normalization remains closely linked to a wider peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This latest move won't fully reopen the border, but it will move Turkey and Armenia one step closer to normal commercial and economic relations. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Well, for decades, the border between Turkey and Armenia symbolized frozen relations and unresolved history. Now, quiet technical steps may be opening the door to something much larger. Well, joining us now to unpack the significance of this latest move is Associate Professor Dr. Şvay Akçakalın at Ankara Hacı Bayram Veli University in, of course, Ankara, Turkey. Professor, very good indeed to have you with us tonight on Primetime. Just give us a sense of the context of this and how significant is this latest step between Turkey and Armenia, both in practical but also in political terms?
Thank you very much. Of course, you also mentioned that it is one of the milestone in the Turkish-Armenia history right now. Of course, this is one of the milestone, but it's so important step to have another biggest milestone to opening the landlocked border and also reopening the embassies in each countries. It is not the only economical terms important, but also symbolically and politically, it shows that this normalization process going well, not only in the diplomatically, but also in the field. So it also brings the positive atmosphere between the two countries' society to bring the possible prosperity and the regional development, while the economic relations has been much more positively since it will be open up the new opportunities for two countries.
Yeah, it's a very good point that you made there. It's obviously framed to some degree as a technical trade measure, but it does carry, doesn't it, that broader symbolic diplomatic meaning too.
Of course, because the trade means that not only the trade between the services or the good, but also it seems that there is a new way of the interaction between the societies. This economical development and possible cooperation in the economics always go along with the kind of the peace process and the normalization process between not only in Turkey and Armenia, but also Azerbaijan and Armenia as well.
Yeah, again, how closely tied are those two things, do you think? The Turkey-Armenia normalization process to relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan?
Of course, since the Second Karabakh War and the broader Azerbaijan-Trump on the Karabakh, there's a clear the two leaders of the Turkey and the Azerbaijan mentioned that these two processes going in a paralleling way. Of course, in this respect, it is expected to see positive development in the Azerbaijan and Armenia peace process, as well as at the same time we can see the much more positive and the concrete steps in the normalization relations between the Turkey and Armenia. So these are not the separate process, but they are ongoing on the same time, same way, is a concrete understanding of the diplomatic initiatives.
So positive steps then, both practical and symbolic. What are the biggest remaining obstacles, though, to fully reopening the border?
Of course, there is a technical part inside, but also there's an expectation, the political changing and constitutional changing in the Armenia regarding some claims on the Turkey, and these approach should be changed. Of course, these all steps have been taken like the symbolic or the trade level, but of course, it's people expected to see this the opening of the landlocked border in upcoming times. Of course, at the same time, there are some issues between the Armenia and Azerbaijan, but they are in the last part of the peace process. So we will see how it's going and how it affects each other.
It's really interesting, this, isn't it, to see the power and potential of trade, because of course, you know, economic cooperation brings with it many, many benefits. Everybody's family, everybody's business wants to do well. Do you think this economic aspect will help eventually reshape political relations?
Yes, of course, in some degree we can say, because many years ago President Erdogan underlined that there should be a fourth level mechanisms between Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia. And he clearly promised that if there will be sustainable peace, it should be also strengthened by the economic cooperation, and it will be much more make a long-term and sustainable way to keep the peace as much as possible. Also, as I mentioned in the beginning as well, the remobilization of the societies and of course the opening of the new dialogues between the two societies are not the easy, and the economy is a good way and also the soft way to bringing the societies together. So it has both facilitator role and it has also role for the sustainable peace.
Dr. Akçakalın, thank you very much indeed for your analysis.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, the brief ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine has collapsed, with both sides now accusing each other of escalating the war once again. Don't go away. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Figuras armenias en Argentina. Lo hizo por plata y es para los gobiernos. Un tipo muy piola.
No, money from Armenia from Russia. Group of Russian Armenians. People who are financial based, some rich Armenians, they live in Russia.
Pashinyan lo puso preso.
Pashinyan is not protecting neocontrol.
The Armenian game is Russia.
No con Pashinyan mismo, pero
Que remuevan a Pashinyan.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note. To this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back to Primetime. Russia and Ukraine are trading accusations after a short US-mediated ceasefire expired on Monday, with renewed strikes hitting both countries.
Russia resumed large-scale attacks on Ukraine after a 3-day ceasefire linked to Friday's commemoration of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. Ukrainian officials say more than 200 drones were launched overnight into Tuesday, damaging energy facilities, apartment buildings, a kindergarten, and a civilian locomotive. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, local authorities said at least 6 people were killed. 2 people died after a drone struck an apartment building in Kryvyi Rih, the hometown of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. 4 others were killed in an aerial bomb attack northeast of the city. Zelensky accused Russia of continuing its attacks after the ceasefire expired, while Kyiv said Moscow had escalated the conflict instead of extending the pause in fighting.
Ukraine has stated that we will respond in kind to Russia. We offered a ceasefire. Unfortunately, after 3 days of relative calm, there have been more Shahed attacks and airstrikes. Activity on the front lines remains high. Therefore, we are responding.
On the front line, Ukraine's military reported 170 combat clashes over the past 24 hours, with the heaviest fighting concentrated around Kostiantynivka and Pokrovsk in eastern Ukraine. Kyiv also said its forces struck gas facilities in Russia's central Orenburg region, more than 1,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Saturday that the conflict was coming to an end, a position the Kremlin reiterated on Tuesday. US President Donald Trump also said the end of the war appeared to be very close.
Yeah, I think it's getting very close. The end of the war in Ukraine, I really think it's getting very close.
But Zelensky rejected that assessment on Monday, saying Russia showed no intention of ending the war and warning that Ukraine was preparing for further attacks. Moscow said it would welcome continued US mediation efforts and that Putin could meet Zelensky once a peace process is finalized. However, major differences remain unresolved, with Russia demanding additional territory and Ukraine insisting that Russian forces withdraw from occupied areas.
Well, for a few days there were hopes of de-escalation, but those hopes now appear to be fading fast as strikes resume across both Russia and Ukraine. Well, joining us now to unpack where the conflict goes from here is Andriy Ordonovich, retired Colonel of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Colonel, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight on Primetime. A very, very short ceasefire then. How significant then is its collapse?
First and foremost, thank you very much for having me today. The situation right now in Ukraine, a little bit changed after almost 3 days of so-called ceasefire. It wasn't completely 100% a ceasefire. Only for the major city, Russia did not use the combined strike of combination missiles as well as the different type strike, UAV, Shaheds, Geran, and other one. As for today, we already felt how the peaceful mood of Russian Federation is 650 already different type of UAVs. Predominantly, as for now, it was false false UAVs been attacking Ukraine. Probably we could expect for the today overnight the bigger amount strike UAVs as well as combination with the different type of missiles, specifically ballistic one and cruise missile.
Now, Ukraine is continuing long-range strikes deep inside Russian territory, isn't it? How is that changing the dynamics of the conflict?
Look at for Ukraine to keep this strategy, it is directed as the aim to undermine economical capability of Russia to sustain war, to sustain operational tempo. Our deep and middle strike are primarily targeting of defense industrial bases, enterprises, oil and gas refineries, as well as logistical hub, command post, and other one. Everything is directed to undermine the capability and capacity of Russia to conduct more aggressive action against Ukraine. Secondly, it is also giving to Russia to make a recalculation their approach to it. And primary objectives of Ukrainian military right now, it is increased level of irreversible losses of Russian military. Second one, it is increased destiny of drone lines on the front line. And third, it is exactly mid and deep strike directed to undermine Russian economy. Everything, if would be implemented in accordance with our plan, I believe will reduce operational tempo. Second, will account of Russian approach to it, and probably will bring to the Russian military political leadership other calculation of their war conducting towards Ukraine.
Now, Colonel, Russia says the war may be nearing an end. Ukraine says Moscow is actually escalating. What's really going on here?
Look, I can give you a couple examples. As for today, it was roughly 174 combat clashes in the front line. They've been using 8,246 different type kamikaze drones. They also been using shelling toward the populated area 2,460 times. Out of it, 82 using of MRLS. I would not say that Russia is looking for the peaceful resolution or to bring somehow to low level of hostilities and come back to the negotiation table. All these figures, which I already mentioned, is not telling us. But again, we as a Ukrainian military trying to give a different approach and thought to Russian leadership. When we are talking about the frontline casualties, 90-95% of Russian casualties killed in action and wounded in action right now coming from the FPV drones. And we are increasing the percentage of application of these drones in order to recalculate or bring the Russian leadership idea to recalculate their approach toward the war of aggression.
What's driving this rhetoric then? Because President Trump said a similar thing. He said peace could be very close. Is there any real evidence of diplomatic progress behind the scenes?
The positive, what I can assess, it is the idea and the information from Russian Federation that they are gonna not be against EU, European representation during the negotiation of peace in Ukraine. And President Trump, looking his leverage with Russian, trying probably to change course of action Russians, presenting the real figures from the intel sources which US and NATO are able to present it. And probably the calculation which Russian right now receive from the US and own sources are telling them that they are, specifically for the April months, lost territory more than occupied. 150 square kilometers been liberated of Ukraine with 0 square kilometers gained by Russia. But their casualties are very high. from month to month, they are losing from 30,000 up to the 35,000. And we have aim to increase up to the 50,000. Ministry of Defense Fedorov assigned such task toward the Ukrainian defense forces.
Now, Colonel, I have to ask you about this Sarmat nuclear message, this announcement that Putin has made. What do you make of what's been said? How relevant is it, do you think, to this conflict?
It is a highly risky situation when we are talking about the different type of ballistic missiles of Russia. It is very dangerous for Ukraine due to the fact we do have a very efficient the air defense system, which comprising of different launchers as well as the interceptors. But the problem is not every interceptors and launchers could be adequate toward the ballistic missiles. As I would mention it that our air defense system already able to tackle cruise missile up to the 80%, shut it down. Only 20% somehow could reach a target, but also our EW is very much effective against a Kinzhal aeroballistic Russian missiles. It is dangerous for sure, but I believe it. Our military leadership accounts this already and trying to tackle problem in this negotiation of partners to bring more PAC, SME kind of interceptors because and improve or empower our electronic warfare system. To some extent, they are very much effective to avoid real targets, but in the same time, it could be a supplementary crashes of the civil infrastructure as a result of EW actions. But again, it is very risky for escalation. Second, it is also a huge headache for Ukrainian defense forces.
Kyiv and Moscow continue to be very far apart, not just in terms of their position, but also their analysis of the situation. Is there any realistic path to negotiation that you can see at this point?
I can feel a situation assessment from Russian side because first time for the last almost 4.5 years, the political leadership of Russia accounted that maybe it is time coming to a real negotiation. Current negotiation, what we do have, are very much helpful for the resolution of humanitarian issue. Among them, it is POW exchange. And we are eager, even right now, supply 1,000 names to Russian Federation for their consideration. And hopefully in coming days, it's going to be done. Second, it was also some information from our American colleagues that they are looks like assessing Russian side that they are more serious for negotiation. But again, my belief, personal belief, that as strong as possible Ukrainian military is gonna be, negotiation position would be as close as possible because the military are creating right condition. And if we would be more successful on the battlefield, if we would be more successful on intercepting ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as Shahens, more recalculation will come to the mind of Russian political military leadership.
Colonel, we appreciate your time and your analysis very much indeed. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me once more.
Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Don't go away.
Figura Armenia que Argentina. Empieza por plata y es para los gobiernos. Un tipo muy piola.
No, money from Armenia from Russia. Group of Russian Armenians. People who are financial days, some rich Armenians, they live in Russia.
Pashinyan lo puso.
Pashinyan is not protecting Nagorno-Karabakh.
The Armenian game is Russia.
No con Pashinyan mismo, pero.
Que remuevan a Pashinyan.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Okay, welcome back. Let's turn to the UK now. And its political arena is entering a period of heightened uncertainty as Prime Minister Keir Starmer confronts mounting pressure over his future after the King's speech today and a major parliamentary confrontation. Here's more.
As the UK prepares for the state opening of Parliament, Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing one of the most serious political crises of his premiership, with growing pressure from within his own Labour Party for him to step down. Despite the turmoil, Starmer will join Wednesday's grand ceremonial proceedings led by King Charles III, where the monarch will deliver the King's speech, a statement written by Starmer's government setting out its planned new laws and political agenda for the year ahead. King Charles will travel to the House of Lords to outline more than 35 proposed bills and draft laws focused on the economy, national security and reforming public services. Later in the day, the Prime Minister will face further pressure as he takes questions in Parliament and delivers a speech during a Commons debate. The pressure on Starmer intensified after Labour suffered major losses in local elections. 4 ministers resigned and called on the Prime Minister to step down, joining more than 80 Labour MPs, urging him either to quit immediately or announce a timetable for his departure. Despite the unrest, Starmer has insisted he will continue governing. Speaking after what he described as a destabilising 48 hours, he said Britain faced a choice between moving forward with reform or returning to chaos and instability. He added that the government remained focused on cutting the cost of living and protecting national security during an increasingly dangerous global climate. On the other hand, more than 100 Labour MPs signed a statement backing Starmer, saying this was no time for a leadership contest. Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy also defended the Prime Minister, saying that Keir Starmer had his full support and that critics had failed to unite behind an alternative candidate.
To the Middle East now, and at least 13 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon, according to the Ministry of Health and state media. Well, the attacks come amid continuing tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. The situation on the ground remains highly volatile, with both sides reporting strikes and casualties as hostilities persist in the region.
Lebanon's Ministry of Health and State Media say at least 13 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in the country's south. The attacks come amid ongoing tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. According to the state-run national news agency, at least 6 people were killed and 7 injured when a house was hit in the Kfar Dunain area. The Lebanese Ministry of Health said 2 members of the Civil Defense Emergency Service were killed and 1 injured in an Israeli strike in Nabateh. They were reportedly carrying out a rescue mission in response to an earlier attack. The Israeli military said it is reviewing the reports. Lebanon's health ministry accused Israeli forces of deliberately targeting medical workers, calling it a violation of international humanitarian law. It said 108 emergency medical staff have been killed since the war began. Separately, a Syrian national was killed and his wife injured when an Israeli drone struck a motorcycle in the Tar Deba area, according to officials. Israel said it targeted a suspect attempting to launch an air attack. In another incident, 3 people were reported killed in an attack on the Jabshit area. Hezbollah said it carried out drone attacks on Israeli positions, while the Israeli military said it has intensified operations in southern Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah infrastructure. Officials from both sides are expected to meet in Washington on Thursday to discuss a possible ceasefire. Lebanese authorities say 2,869 people have been killed since the war began, while Israel reports 18 soldiers and 4 civilians killed over the same period.
The UK and France have co-hosted a meeting of over 40 nations to discuss a defensive mission to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The UK is deploying the HMS Dragon to the region as a show of intent, but members of the international coalition currently remain reluctant to intervene unless the situation in the waterway stabilises. William Dennislow reports now from Brussels.
According to the UK's Defence Secretary John Healey, the purpose of this virtual gathering was to turn diplomatic agreements into practical military plans. He says it is a bid to restore confidence and ultimately to see the resumption of trade flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, this incredibly vital waterway accounting for around a fifth of the world's energy. He says that restoring that confidence, getting energy and other supplies through this strategic waterway is the #1 priority. Now, he says that this meeting is an opportunity to turn words into tangible actions. That is why he says that the UK is deploying the HMS Dragon to the region to show that it is serious about making tangible steps going forward. The UK isn't the only one making such pledges to show real concrete action. Lithuania has said it is willing to provide mine-sweeping assistance to try and clear the Strait of Hormuz going forward, to try and provide that confidence to allow vessels to once again pass through this waterway that has seen transit effectively stop to a crawl amid this ongoing conflict between the US and Israel and Iran. The Trump administration in the United States has been long calling for its allies around the world to do more, to be braver, to take stronger action to help clear the Strait of Hormuz and to facilitate the passage of vessels through this waterway. But there remains a huge sticking point. The UK and coalition partners say they are willing to engage more proactively when they say conditions allow. But there are huge questions over what exactly those conditions will be. Currently, it certainly seems that because of the volatility in the region, there is very little appetite to execute some of these plans and risk putting their vessels, their personnel, in harm's way. William Denslow, Free News, in Brussels.
Egypt is positioning itself as a key trade bridge between Europe and the Gulf as shipping instability in the Strait of Hormuz forces countries to look for alternative freight routes.
A cargo corridor linking Italy to Egypt is expanding deeper into Gulf and African markets. The roll-on, roll-off or row-row route was launched around 2024, connecting Italy's Trieste port with Egypt's Damietta port across the Mediterranean. It has since been extended beyond Egypt, with cargo moving through the Suez Canal or overland to Red Sea ports, before continuing to Gulf destinations including the UAE, Kuwait, Oman and Qatar. Amr Kataya of Zenith Enterprise for Marine Services says the route significantly cuts transport times.
It considerably reduces the shipping period between Europe and the Arabian Gulf because it takes only 36 hours for a vessel from the Suez Canal to Jeddah port in Saudi Arabia.
However, analysts say the corridor cannot fully replace the Strait of Hormuz, as repeated loading and unloading limits capacity. They add that while the route is still developing, pressure on global supply chains is driving interest in alternative links between Europe, the Gulf, and Africa.
EU defence ministers have met in Brussels to discuss military readiness, Ukraine's support and Europe's response to instability from the Middle East to its eastern borders.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where EU defence ministers met in Brussels to accelerate military readiness, increase support for Ukraine, and respond to mounting instability from the Middle East to Europe's borders. The European Defence Agency will be strengthened with new innovation and experimentation units, recognizing that Ukraine has transformed modern warfare with drones and rapid battlefield adaptation, reshaping defence planning. With Ukraine Minister Fedorov and NATO Deputy Secretary General Shekerinska joining discussions, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas confirmed the first tranche of the EU's €90 billion Ukraine loan will be disbursed next month, with funds going directly toward drones, now seen as one of Kyiv's most critical capabilities. Ministers also addressed unlocking €6.6 billion frozen in the European Peace Facility, while advancing EU security guarantees for a potential truce, including expanding the EU satellite center's role in ceasefire monitoring, tracking Russia's shadow fleet, countering sanctions evasion, and modernizing 2 Ukrainian military training centers. Regarding the Strait of Hormuz, they warned any closure is untenable and that Operation Aspidus could be extended to the strait. On Lebanon, ministers explored a new EU mission to strengthen state control, building on €100 million in support for the Lebanese armed forces. Kallas said, quote, "The stronger the Lebanese army, the weaker Hezbollah." Finally, she warned Russia is preparing for a long-term confrontation with the West, while Europe's defense industry is still scaling up too slowly. Ministers and industry leaders looked at ways to speed up arms production, close capability gaps, and make deterrence credible. Attention now shifts to NATO's eastern flank and the Bucharest 9 summit, where Secretary General Mark Rutte will give fresh signals on Europe's next security moves later today. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
US President Donald Trump says Iran is under control as Washington increases pressure on Tehran through military threats and an expanding blockade on Iranian ports. Our correspondent Ube Sharpanda has more from Washington.
As he departed China on Tuesday, President Trump told reporters that, quote, "We have Iran very much under control." And he reiterated that either a deal is going to be made with Tehran or the Iranians will, in the president's words, face decimation. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth told Congress that the U.S. has a plan to escalate if necessary. The White House believes that the economic pressure of the blockade on Iran's ports and threats of renewed military operations will force Iran to accept a deal that would have Iran relinquish its remaining stockpile of highly enriched uranium. So far, however, Iranian authorities have refused to accept the deal presented to them by President Trump's team. And President Trump on Tuesday also said that his main concern remains in ensuring that Iran is not able to build a nuclear weapon, despite the financial hardships facing the U.S. economy as a result of increased oil prices. The United States Central Command said on Tuesday that its forces had redirected 65 commercial vessels and disabled 4 ships amid an American blockade on Iranian ports that was imposed last month. 3 vessels had been redirected since it was reported on Monday. Not all were Iranian or linked to Iran. According to recent leaks to the media, American intelligence agencies are telling policymakers in Washington that Iran has regained access to most of its missile sites, launchers, and underground facilities. Some of the alleged intelligence being reported suggests that Iran has restored operational access to most of its missile sites stationed along the Strait of Hormuz. Mubi Shabander, A News, Washington.
Meanwhile, Iran has lodged a complaint against the US at the Hague Court of Arbitration over military attacks on its nuclear facilities, economic sanctions and threats of force, a development seen as a new sign of growing strain in the Islamic Republic's standoff with the United States.
Iran has filed a lawsuit against the United States at the Hague Court of Arbitration over 3 instances of military aggression against Iranian nuclear facilities, imposition of economic sanctions, and threat of resorting to force. According to the Tasnim semi-official news agency affiliated to the Revolutionary Guards, the case was filed at the Iran-US Arbitration Court based on provisions of the 1981 Algiers Declaration. The petition has cited the U.S. violation of its international obligations in the 12-day joint war with Israel against Iran last June. Based on the first paragraph of the Algiers Declaration, the U.S. government is committed not to interfere directly or indirectly, politically or militarily in Iran's internal affairs. In its petition, Iran has cited the Algiers Declaration, referring to the instances of the U.S.'s violation of its commitment during the imposed 12-day war, as well as the imposition of economic sanctions and the renewed threat of resorting to force against Iran. Tehran has also requested the court to condemn Washington for violating the declaration and to require it to immediately end its direct and indirect interference in Iran's internal affairs, to provide a guarantee that such violations will not be repeated, and to compensate Iran for the war damages. Amid stalled talks with the U.S. in the wake of the second Israel-U.S. war on Iran, which broke out on 28th of February, the news of Iran's legal complaint can serve as another stumbling block in the ongoing diplomatic efforts to reach an interim deal to end the war. Turaj Shiralilu from downtown Tehran for A News.
Rising diesel prices are leaving many Indonesian fishermen unable to work, with boats stranded at port and crews calling for government support.
Hundreds of fishing boats remain docked at Juwana port in Indonesia's central Java province. The port is usually one of the region's busiest fishing hubs, with vessels returning from eastern waters carrying mackerel and tuna for export markets such as Thailand, China and Japan. But rising diesel prices are now putting pressure on boat owners and crews.
Kalau yang dirasakan untuk kenaikannya ada sekitar.
The price increases have happened about 3 times. The first was after Eid, when it rose to around 14,000 rupiah. Then it increased again to about 18,000. And now the latest information puts it at around 27,000 to 30,000 rupiah.
For traditional fishermen, fuel is one of the biggest costs. Ahik says diesel now makes up around 70 to 80% of a vessel's operating expenses, while current fish prices are not enough to cover the pressure. The impact is already visible across Juwana.
The impact is that fishermen cannot go to sea. Out of around 1,680 boats in Juwana, only about 79 were operating in March, and around 425 in April.
For crew members, staying ashore means losing their only source of income. Many say they have spent most of their lives at sea and have few options for work on land.
It's a very heavy burden, because when we are at home, we have no income. As fishermen, once we return to land, we have no other skills. It's difficult to find work on shore. We don't have the connections or experience.
Boat owners are now urging the government to step in, warning that without support, more vessels could remain idle. For Indonesia's fishing communities, the surge in fuel costs is no longer just a business problem. It is threatening the livelihoods of those who depend on the sea.
Well, on the sidelines of Uzbekistan Energy Week 2026, Uzbekneta Gas, SOCAR and British Petroleum signed a major agreement aimed at expanding hydrocarbon exploration in Uzbekistan. Our correspondent in Tashkent brings us more.
A new trilateral energy partnership has been announced during the Oil and Gas Uzbekistan conference in Tashkent, as British Petroleum officially joined a production sharing agreement between Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan's state oil company, SOCAR. The agreement focuses on geological exploration and future hydrocarbon production in 6 investment blocks located in Uzbekistan's Ustyurt region. SOCAR President Rovshan Najaf highlighted the importance of regional energy cooperation, expressing confidence that BP's international experience and the joint efforts of all sides would contribute to the successful implementation of the project and further development of the region's energy potential.
I'm getting questions around like, okay, how you manage to speed up and just deliver the project in such a short period of time, and everyone witnessing really great quality of the data received. And my answer to that, it's really due to strong cooperation and that trustful relationship we managed to build between all the governmental organizations at all levels. And I truly believe that's exactly the key pillar that makes us to success with the implementation of the key milestones as we work on the project. For example, as we speak, we actually managed to deliver more than 50% of seismic acquisition in the field. So that really proves that we've moved beyond ideas, intentions, to practical implementation of the project.
We are very proud of our 3 decades-long strong partnership with SOCAR. Together with SOCAR and with the support of the government of Azerbaijan, we have delivered world-scale projects in Azerbaijan, in the Azerbaijani sector of the Caspian Sea. Throughout the 3 decades, we gained a huge knowledge about the Caspian resources. And today, we, together with SOCAR, now expanding this great partnership to a new country. We're expanding that great partnership to the eastern coast of the Caspian region, to the Central Asia. And in Uzbekistan today we signed documents that will allow BP's accession, BP's joining to the new PSA, Production Sharing Agreement, that will cover 6 blocks in the North Ustyurt region of Uzbekistan.
Alongside energy cooperation, SOCAR is also expanding educational partnerships in Uzbekistan through the Baku Higher Oil School. The university has launched a dual diploma master's program in oil and gas technology, together with Bukhara State Technical University and Tashkent Chemical Technological Institute. Currently, 16 Uzbek students are studying within the program and are expected to graduate in June this year.
I would also like to note that the academic program of this school fully meets international standards and reflects the demands of today's realities. In particular, I would like to highlight that the school's management, especially director, the teaching staff and the entire team, treat us with great respect and understanding. Our professors always support us, share their knowledge and experience and motivate us to achieve greater goals. Every student here has gained not only professional development, but also personal growth. We have become more confident, learned how to work effectively in teams, and developed a broader perspective on many issues. We continue striving to improve ourselves and move forward.
Together, the energy partnership and educational initiative reflect the growing strategic cooperation between Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan and international partners in both energy development and professional training for the sector's future. It is Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A-News.
SOCAR President Rovshan Najaf attended the 28th International Oil and Gas Exhibition and Conference in Tashkent. As part of the event, the Uzbek president received Rovshan Najaf along with BP executives. Now, SOCAR, BP and Uzbek officials discussed progress on the joint project and expanding cooperation in exploration and production activities. Following the talks, documents were signed for BP to join the production sharing agreement on the Ustyurt investment blocks. Mr. Najaf also met with the MOL Group Executive Vice President to review ongoing joint projects. Okay, let's take a look at new economic forecasts from Azerbaijani analyst Ferdowsi Fikretsada, outlining how trade between Azerbaijan and Armenia could develop if lasting peace and stable relations are achieved between the two South Caucasus neighbours. Now, the study highlights both the potential scale of future trade and the key sectors expected to drive it.
A new economic forecast outlines the potential scale of future trade between Azerbaijan and Armenia, suggesting that bilateral trade could reach between $400 million and $600 million under conditions of lasting peace and stable economic relations. The assessment, prepared by economist Ferdowsi Fikretsada, examines possible economic ties emerging from ongoing normalization efforts between the two South Caucasus neighbours. Within the projected structure of trade, energy products are expected to be the largest contributor, accounting for around $130 to $170 million in value. The analysis further outlines export potential from both sides. Azerbaijan's exports to Armenia are estimated at roughly $270 to $375 million in total, driven mainly by fuel and petrochemical products. On the other side, Armenia's exports to Azerbaijan are projected at around $150 to $215 million, with metals, particularly copper concentrate and molybdenum, forming the largest share. Azerbaijan's export basket would also include construction materials and agricultural goods, while Armenia would additionally supply food products, clothing and footwear. The report notes that these projections assume low political risk, functioning border and customs systems, and operational transport infrastructure. It adds that future trade would likely be based more on economic complementarity than direct competition. It concludes that the realization of this potential depends primarily on achieving sustainable peace between Baku and Yerevan.
Prolonged power outages in northern Cameroon are triggering an economic crisis, leaving businesses struggling and residents facing growing daily hardships. Well, communities across the region say recurring blackouts have disrupted livelihoods for months, with no clear end in sight.
Northern Cameroon is facing a deepening economic and social crisis as prolonged power outages continue to disrupt daily life and cripple local businesses. In the city of Garoua, traders say recurring blackouts over the past 3 months have brought commercial activity to a near standstill, leaving many struggling to earn a living. For tailor and garment maker Sabo Sani, unreliable electricity has made it nearly impossible to keep his workshop running or complete customer orders.
I have a tailor workshop, but it's not up and running at the moment. Why isn't it working? Because we need electricity, but we don't have any. We only get electricity for maybe 3 or 4 hours a day.
The situation is equally difficult for other small business owners across the Yelwa market. Hairdresser and fishmongers say the lack of electricity has severely affected their ability to serve customers and keep their business operating.
What the customer needs is very difficult. Very difficult why? Because you cannot do everything. You cannot wash the hair, you cannot use the hair dryer because there's no light. And we don't know how to do again.
The crisis continues despite the presence of the Lagdo Dam, a major hydroelectric facility that has powered northern Cameroon for decades. But in recent years, electricity production has dropped sharply, worsening outages across the region. Officials say low water levels at the dam are limiting power generation and forcing authorities to implement load shedding across the region.
During 2021 and 2022, we first experienced the most critical deficit from this site. So actually, what we are facing is load shedding. It is just because the Lagdo, due to water, cannot generate power at a high level. The level of water is too low, and we are managing to avoid a crack within this month of May.
For now, communities across the region continue to endure daily blackouts, while hoping for long-term solutions to Cameroon's chronic energy shortages.
France's National Assembly has passed a resolution condemning Georgia's ruling party for democratic backsliding, calling for sanctions against the oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili and the release of political prisoners. Now, it's not the first time Paris has turned its attention to the South Caucasus. Our own Nini Nikolashvili has more details.
France's National Assembly has voted 68 to 28 in favor of a resolution expressing concern over developments in Georgia, including democratic backsliding and political polarization. The resolution calls for possible sanctions against businessman Bidzina Ivanishvili, urges the release of detained opposition figures, and asks French authorities to review the Legion of Honor previously awarded to Ivanishvili. While the resolution is non-binding, it reflects growing European concern about Georgia's political trajectory at a time of wider geopolitical change in the South Caucasus. Since 2022, the region has undergone significant shifts. Russia's influence has weakened amid the war in Ukraine, while regional states have sought to diversify their foreign policy partnerships. The United States has also taken on a more active diplomatic role, including brokering the 2025 peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan in Washington. Against that backdrop, Georgia remains strategically important for both Europe and the wider region, particularly as part of the middle corridor linking Europe with Central Asia. European officials continue to stress the importance of democratic reforms and institutional stability, while Tbilisi maintains that it is pursuing policies aimed at protecting national sovereignty and stability. Georgian officials criticized the French resolution, describing it as politically motivated and not reflective of the views of the Georgian public. The debate highlights the continuing differences between Tbilisi and some Western partners over governance, democratic standards, and Georgia's future direction. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Now, as the race to the Eurovision Grand Final heats up in Vienna, the first semi-final has certainly delivered its fair share of surprises, fan favourites, and plenty of atmosphere inside the arena. A News' Katie Wilson has more on the countries heading through and the mood surrounding this year's contest.
There we have it. We now know the 10 qualifiers from the first semi-final of the Eurovision Song Contest and who will be making it to Saturday's grand final. Now, there were some surprises in there, but some that were pretty expected. So we have Greece and Finland, both top of the odds, no surprises there. Belgium, quite a surprise. Sweden, Moldova, Israel, Serbia, Croatia, Lithuania and Poland. So 10 very happy countries, 5 not so happy, including San Marino, which featured none other than Boy George. So it was a great semi-final, very electric in the arena, and we've been speaking to one participant from Greece who is very happy this evening. Prediction, how are you feeling?
So happy, so excited. Can't wait for Saturday. Can't wait for Saturday. I'm so ready. Let's go.
Afghanistan is facing a silent malnutrition emergency, with women and children among the worst affected. Well, the World Food Programme says funding cuts and supply disruptions are putting a vital lifeline at risk. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis reports from Kabul.
Here in Afghanistan, a silent malnutrition emergency is deepening as families struggle with rising hunger, poverty and shrinking humanitarian support. The World Food Programme says more than 13.8 million people are facing acute food insecurity across the country. Nearly 5 million children and pregnant or breastfeeding women are malnourished, including 3.7 million children suffering from acute malnutrition. The crisis is being driven by several overlapping shocks. Afghanistan's economy remains fragile, jobs are scarce, and climate extremes continue to damage livelihoods. More recently, regional tensions, border closures and disrupted supply chains have pushed food prices even higher, making it harder for families to afford basic meals. Last year, WFP supported more than 12.4 million Afghans with food rations and nutrition assistance. Nearly three-quarters of those reached around 9.1 million people were women and children. But funding cuts have forced the agency to scale back its work. It now says assistance is reaching only a fraction of Afghanistan's undernourished mothers and children. And even that support could face further reductions. WFP says it urgently needs $350 million to support Afghanistan's most vulnerable people over the next 6 months. For now, aid agencies warn that without continued support, thousands more women and children could be pushed into severe hunger and malnutrition. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
China is urging Pakistan to play a greater diplomatic role in easing tensions surrounding Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. Our correspondent has more from Beijing.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has urged Pakistan to intensify its mediation efforts between Iran and the United States, especially regarding the reopening of the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz. During a phone call with Pakistani Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mohammad Ishaq Dar, Wang emphasized the need for diplomatic engagement to maintain regional stability and ensure safe maritime navigation through one of the world's most important energy transit routes. China reaffirmed its support for Pakistan's growing role as a mediator in the ongoing US-Iran negotiations, as Islamabad continues efforts to facilitate another round of talks aimed at preventing further escalation in the Middle East. The discussions come during heightened international concern over disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, which carries a significant share of global oil shipments and remains central to global energy security. The diplomatic push also comes ahead of the highly anticipated high-level talks between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing, where the Middle East conflict and maritime security are expected to feature prominently. Beijing has increasingly positioned itself as a supporter of diplomatic solutions while balancing its strategic ties with Tehran and its overall global economic interests. Manam, A News, Beijing.
One of Africa's most dangerous volcanoes is helping communities rebuild their lives in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, where residents are turning hardened lava into construction materials.
Goma is built on volcanic lava, and now residents are using the hardened rock into a tool for rebuilding the city. Every day, quarry workers in Monigi and Kibati cut black volcanic rock from the slopes of Mount Nyiragongo, making paving stones that are changing the face of the city. Cut by hand and machine and laid one by one, the stones are replacing the mud and the dust on Goma's streets, creating cleaner roads and jobs for hundreds of young people.
When the volcano erupts, it produces lava, and over time, the lava turns into stone. And there is the material we use. We use stones from the 2002 eruption because they are very hard. We haven't started working with the stones from the 2021 eruption. We collect them near Kabati and cut them into paving stones, used for roads and houses.
Goma has no large factories, meaning most of the work is done entirely by hand. With only hammers, stonemasons have to shape rough volcanic blocks into paving stones with precision. A skilled craftsman can produce up to 30 paving stones a day, with each costing around $16.
Using these paving stones is important because they beautify the city. We are proud because these stones come from Goma itself, from Nyiragongo volcano. They are our own stones. They make the environment more pleasant.
Behind every paved road is hard labor. In the quarries, many stone crushers spend long hours breaking massive volcanic rocks by hand, all to earn a living for their families.
This work is very difficult. Not everyone can do it, but people work here because they cannot stay idle. You have to work so life can continue and to avoid turning to crime.
Successive volcanic eruptions destroyed farmland that communities once depended on for food and income, and those living around Nyiragongo do not wish for another eruption.
We do not want another eruption because it destroys our fields and livelihoods. Yet, that's where we get our food from. It also affects our children. There are plenty of stones here from the past eruptions, and we do not want another, because it causes a lot of damage and destruction to our fields.
Over the last 3 years, Goma's feeder roads have seen a transformation, all from a natural hazard that is offering a sustainable solution. Caroline B., CGTN.
Sudan's National Theatre has reopened after suffering heavy damage during the civil war in the Khartoum region. Now, officials and artists say the restoration is not only about rebuilding a performance venue, but also reviving culture, identity and public life after months of war.
The Sudan National Theatre in Omdurman has officially reopened following rehabilitation efforts aimed at restoring one of the country's most important cultural institutions. The reopening ceremony marked the first phase of rebuilding the theatre after months of war-related destruction. Authorities say the theatre's return is part of wider efforts to revive public life and restore cultural identity in Khartoum and surrounding areas. During the conflict, the National Theatre and nearby media institutions were heavily damaged while under the control of the Rapid Support Forces. Officials say the venue, once a symbol of Sudanese arts and culture, was turned into a military site.
The National Theatre suffered destruction, and it can be said that more than 80% of theatre buildings were completely destroyed.
Despite the devastation, theatre practitioners continued working during the war, using art to support displaced communities and children affected by the conflict. Playwright and researcher Abdullah Mirghani says theatre remains central to Sudanese society.
Theatre is the lung we breathe with, and it shapes the consciousness of Sudanese society. For us, the return of theatre is a day of celebration.
The Ministry of Culture says restoring theatres and cultural institutions is essential to rebuilding society and preserving Sudan's heritage.
The systematic destruction was intended to erase identity, and Sudan is rich in its heritage, arts and culture. One of the most important social pillars is a theatre.
Community-led groups have joined government efforts to clean and restore the theatre, while calls continue for greater investment in Sudan's cultural sector. Observers say long-term recovery will require sustained funding, legislative reform and support for artistic programs aimed at reconnecting communities after years of conflict. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Well, that brings us to the end of Prime Time. Please do join us again tomorrow, though, for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.